A child pushed into a river by his own mother returns 12 years later, carrying the severed head of a dragon. He has lost his name, his kingdom, and the memory of his royal lineage. But fate refuses to let him be. It forces him to fall for the Queen of Iceland, compels him to slay a dragon, and burdens him with a hoard of cursed gold. If you were Kriemhild, knowing this man's heart belonged to another, would you let him chase his true love, or would you use a potion to bind his heart to you forever? Siegfried thought he had conquered the dragon, reclaimed his identity, and won the world. But he didn't realize that the moment he put on the Nibelung ring, his true catastrophe had only just begun. Many years ago, the kingdom of Zanton was a land of nobility, but one night, flames tore through the city walls as the Saxon king's army stormed the gates. Amidst the screams and the chaos, the king knew his end was near. He entrusted his only hope to the queen. Their son, Siegfried, was still just a child who understood nothing. The queen fled with him, racing through a path of blood and death. She dared not look back, for to do so would be to witness her husband's fall and the total collapse of her nation. When they reached the riverbank, the queen had no choice. She placed the boy on a raft and sent him adrift. In that moment, it wasn't fear that gripped her, but the certainty that if he stayed, he would die by the enemy's blade. Little Siegfried was carried away by the current. His life was spared, but his memory was erased. By the time he awoke, he didn't know who he was, who his father had been, or that his kingdom had been reduced to ashes. He was found by an old blacksmith named Eyvind, who didn't turn him in or ask questions, simply giving him a new name, Eric. From then on, the Prince of Zanton ceased to exist, and only Eric, the blacksmith's son, remained. 12 years passed, and the boy grew into a strong man. He spent his days forging swords and listening to the legends of the old gods. The old man told him that the paths of light in the sky lead to Valhalla, where true heroes sit beside the gods. Eric listened, yet he felt a persistent emptiness. He knew he wasn't meant to stay in a blacksmith's shop forever. Then, one night, the sky tore open. A fireball, a weapon discarded by the gods, slammed into the forest. It wasn't a mere stone, but a piece of meteoric iron, glowing with a pale, eerie light. That same night, the Queen of Iceland, Brunhild, arrived. She was no ordinary woman. She was the most powerful queen in the north, an unconquerable warrior. A prophecy had foretold that where the fire fell, a man would appear whose strength could rival hers, a man who might even defeat her in battle. Brunhild didn't believe such a man existed, yet fate placed Eric directly in her path. They met in the woods. Eric mistook her for an enemy. One was a young blacksmith, the other an Icelandic queen. Without a word, they drew their swords. Brunhild's strength was terrifying, yet Eric actually managed to bring her to the ground. That duel forged an unbreakable connection between them. Brunhild wasn't angry. She recognized in him the answer to her long-awaited prophecy. She looked at Eric as if she had finally found what she had been searching for. Eric, too, was drawn to this powerful, proud, and fiery woman. He asked where he could find her, and she replied, "Iceland." It was then Eric realized he hadn't fallen for a common woman, but a queen. He didn't flinch, for to him, status meant nothing in the face of their love. He promised to seek her out one day, and Brunhild promised to wait. But this is where fate is at its cruelest. It allows two people to fall in love, but it never guarantees they will be together. After the fire fell, Eric's heart changed. He longed to leave the forge and follow the river that had brought him to this life, hoping to find his past. Eyvind sensed the shift and, without protest, set out with him toward Burgundy. They intended only to deliver weapons to King Gunther, but upon arriving, they found the kingdom gripped by terror. A dragon named Fafnir had awakened. No one knew its origin, but it burned villages and slaughtered people. withstanding even the king's best warriors. The sharpest blades shattered against its scales like they were striking iron. As soldiers fell and the king lay wounded, the kingdom realized one thing: their steel was useless against the beast. Eric sought to kill the dragon, but in the eyes of others, he was just a blacksmith. Such tasks were reserved for kings and noble warriors, not commoners. The young Prince Giselair admired him, and after Eric gifted him a sword, they became friends. But Hagen, the king's advisor, looked at him differently. Hagen was not a man who trusted heroes easily. He saw no courage in Eric, only a threat. While everyone else was paralyzed by the dragon, Eric fixed his gaze on the meteoric iron. He knew that ordinary steel couldn't pierce Fafnir, so he resolved to forge a blade not of this earth. As the furnace roared and the hammer struck, the meteorite took the shape of a blade beneath his hands. It was no ordinary weapon, but a judgment forged by the hand of fate itself. When the sword was complete, Eyvind asked him what he would name it. Eric replied Balmung. He said he simply liked the sound of it, but at the mention of the name, Eyvind's face turned pale. Balmung was the name of the legendary sword of the Zanton royal house. Eric had not yet remembered his identity, but his bloodline had already reclaimed its heritage. The next day, Eric walked alone into Fafnir's forest.
Come out! Come out, you worm!
With no army, no fanfare, and no nobility at his side, he shouted into the darkness, challenging the dragon to emerge. The dragon appeared, its massive body crushing the forest floor. It unleashed a torrent of fire intent on turning the insolent blacksmith into ash. Eric was pushed to the brink, but Balmung sliced through the dragon's defenses. Relying on his sheer nerve and the divine blade, he single-handedly slew Fafnir. The moment the beast collapsed, a dragon slayer was born. However, it wasn't this sword stroke that truly changed his destiny. Eric heard a mysterious voice urging him to bathe in the dragon's blood. He stepped into the scalding stream, letting it coat his entire body. The blood made his skin impenetrable, turning him into a warrior who could not be harmed by any blade, as if he had been anointed by the gods themselves. But fate never grants a complete blessing. A single leaf drifted down and stuck to his back. That spot, untouched by the dragon's blood, became his only vulnerability. The leaf was light, yet it would weigh heavily upon every tragedy in his future. After killing the dragon, Eric entered the lair and gazed upon a hoard that would steal any man's soul. Gold was piled like mountains, jewels glimmered in the darkness, and at the center lay the Nibelung ring. The Nibelungs appeared. They told Eric these treasures were not meant for human hands. The gold had once belonged to their people, only to be stolen by Fafnir. Now that the dragon was dead, the treasure should be returned to them. They warned him that the dragon's gold was cursed. Whoever possessed it would be destroyed by it. Fafnir had died because of the curse, and anyone who tried to claim it would eventually be consumed by their own weaknesses. But Eric had just slain a dragon. He was at the zenith of his pride. He didn't believe in curses, and he certainly wasn't going to be scared off by a few words. He felt that since he had risked his life to kill the beast, the treasure was his by right. The more the Nibelungs warned him, the less he was willing to let go. He took the ring, the gold, and discovered a magical helmet called the Tarnhelm, which allowed the wearer to take on another's form. Alberich, a Nibelung who had been exiled and stripped of his immortality for his own insatiable greed, had used the helmet to try and steal the treasure back from Eric. Like the gold itself, Alberich was a manifestation of rotting desire. Eric saw through his disguise, but chose not to kill him, letting him go instead. This seemed like an act of mercy, but it was yet another mistake. Some enemies, once spared, do not feel gratitude. They simply retreat into the shadows, waiting for a better opportunity to strike back. Eric returned to Burgundy with the dragon's head, and the entire kingdom erupted. The blacksmith, who had been dismissed as a nobody, had killed the dragon that had defeated the king and his 12 bravest knights. The people cheered his name, and King Gunther publicly declared him a hero of Burgundy. Siegfried the Dragon Slayer had become an idol to all overnight. But the louder the cheers grew, the colder Hagen's expression became. He saw a man too dangerous to be controlled. Eric possessed the divine sword, the dragon's gold, the adoration of the masses, and a war record that not even the king could match. If such a man stayed in Burgundy, he was a powerful weapon. If he left, he was a threat. Hagen began to pressure Gunther to keep the dragon's gold in the royal vault. His pretense was that it would be safekeeping for Eric and a source of glory for Burgundy. But in truth, he simply wanted to seize the treasure for the throne. Eric was no fool. He respected Gunther, but he refused to surrender the hoard. He deflected the demand with a joke, suggesting that the king's vault might not be large enough to hold it. On the surface, things remained civil, but the cracks in their relationship had already begun to show. At that moment, another danger emerged. The Saxon king who had destroyed Zanton heard of the dragon's gold and immediately led his army to attack. They weren't coming for revenge or glory. They were coming for the gold. 10 years of peace meant nothing in the face of such wealth. Gunther mustered his army to prepare for battle. Hagen suggested bringing Eric, as the reputation of the Dragon Slayer alone would strike fear into the enemy. Eric agreed to fight. He did not want more bloodshed because of his treasure. When the two armies stood in formation, Eric walked to the front. He told the Saxons that the gold was his, and that anyone who wanted it would have to face him. But the twin kings laughed him off. They mocked him, calling him a mere blacksmith, a whelp of Burgundy, until they shouted the words that pierced through the fog of his mind. In an instant, every shattered fragment of Eric's memory came rushing back. The flames, the pursuing soldiers, his mother, the raft, his fallen father, the destroyed kingdom, it all hit him like a flood, breaking the seal that had held his true history captive for 12 years. He finally knew who he was. He was no longer the blacksmith Eric. He was the Prince of Zanton, son of Sigmund, Siegfried. The child who had drifted away on the river hadn't died. He had returned, and now, as the Dragon Slayer, he stood before his enemies. Siegfried defeated the twin kings. By all rights, he could have killed them then and there to avenge his parents and his kingdom. But he didn't. He told them that killing them would not bring true satisfaction. He ordered them out of his sight and declared that their kingdom would be divided between Burgundy and Zanton.
Just get out of my sight.
From that moment on, the name Eric lived on, but Siegfried had awakened. He had reclaimed his identity and was finally worthy of fulfilling his promise to Brunhild. He planned to return to Zanton, retrieve the gold, and set sail for Iceland to marry the queen who had been waiting for him. And in Iceland, Brunhild was waiting. She refused all suitors. Princes, kings, and even Roman emperors meant nothing to her. She set a single rule. Only a man who could defeat her in single combat would be worthy of her hand. Others considered this an impossible trial, but Brunhild knew that the man had already appeared. He had defeated her once, and she knew he would come again. What she didn't know was that as she waited for her true love, Burgundy had marked Siegfried as a prize they refused to lose. Gunther did not want to lose him, and even less did he want to lose the dragon's gold. Hagen understood that if Siegfried left with the hoard, Burgundy would be left with nothing. A darker plan emerged: bind Siegfried to the kingdom through marriage. And the perfect candidate was Gunther's sister, Kriemhild. Kriemhild had long been in love with Siegfried. Since the day he returned to Burgundy with the glory of a dragon slayer, she could no longer hide her gaze. To her, he was the hero, the man, the light that made the entire kingdom dim in his shadow. But Siegfried's heart already belonged to Brunhild. He could not reciprocate Kriemhild's love. Loving someone who does not love you back is painful, yes, but at least it remains honest. However, Hagen approached her with a vial in his hand. It was no ordinary wine, nor a simple herbal tonic. It was a potion of oblivion, provided by Alberic. Alberic wanted the Tarnhelm back, and Hagen wanted to control Siegfried. Two greedy men found common ground, one providing the magic, the other fueling the conspiracy. And so Kriemhild's love was forged into an invisible blade. Hagen told her that once Siegfried drank this, he would forget the other woman in his heart. From that moment on, his old love would wither, and a new one would ignite. He would see her, fall for her, and remain by her side. Kriemhild knew it was wrong. She believed in the new faith, and she understood that this ancient magic carried the scent of a curse. But when a person longs for something too deeply, their reason shrinks as their desire grows. She loved Siegfried and feared losing him. She wasn't born wicked, but in that crucial moment, she chose selfishness. Siegfried was still immersed in the life he had reclaimed. He had only just rediscovered his identity, confirmed his status as the Prince of Zanton, and laid his foster father, Eyvind, to rest. On his deathbed, the old man had revealed the truth kept hidden for years. He had long suspected the boy's noble lineage, having seen the royal birthmark on him all those years ago. He had known that the twin kings were searching for a missing prince of Zantion, but they never found him. Not because they couldn't, but because Eyvind had given him a different name and protected him. The old man confessed that he hadn't taken the boy in just to protect him. More deeply, it was because he had lived his life without a wife or children, and Eric had given him his first taste of what it meant to be a father. This was the most heartbreaking realization. Siegfried had found his true father, the king who had died in battle. Yet he understood that the man who had truly raised him, taught him to forge steel, taught him how to live, and guided him into becoming a hero was the old blacksmith before him. Eyvind wished to return to fire and water in the way of the old gods. He told Siegfried that the world was changing, that old faiths and new were clashing, but that both he and Brunhild were children of the old world. The gods had given them power, but also a destiny they were bound to fulfill. Siegfried promised him he would return home with his beloved, but the old man would not live to see that day. Eyvind passed away. Siegfried mourned him, saying that beasts die, men die, and all life on earth must die. But a true hero never dies, for he lives on in memory. At this moment, Siegfried was still as pure as a newly forged blade. He believed in love, in his father, in honor, and in the belief that he could take the hoard and go to Brunhild to start a new fate. But the turning point of his destiny was already silently closing in. Kriemhild held the cup out to him. Siegfried drank the wine. Brunhild's name began to fade from his heart. That night of the meteor, their duel in the forest, the woman who promised to wait for him in Iceland. It was all slowly erased from his memory by the magic. It wasn't that he stopped loving her. He was stripped of the very capacity to do so. When he looked at Kriemhild again, his heart had been rewritten. He forgot the promise he had made. He forgot that there was a woman in Iceland turning away every suitor just to wait for him. Siegfried believed he had fallen in love with Kriemhild. Burgundy finally got the result they wanted. The hero stayed, and the dragon's gold stayed. Royal power seemed secure, but everyone had forgotten one thing. The Nibelungs had warned that the curse would not bite immediately. It would find your weakness, and from there, slowly tear you apart. Siegfried's body had only one weakness, on his back, but his destiny had another, in his heart. A hero can slay a dragon, defeat kings, and rise from the ashes of a fallen nation. But when he cannot even remember who he once loved, his sword, no matter how sharp, cannot save him. The dragon was dead, but the curse had only just begun, and far away in Iceland, Brunhild was still waiting for the man who would love her forever. She did not know that Siegfried hadn't failed to come. He had simply forgotten the way home.